Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating political puzzle. How did the Indian National Congress, over decades, possibly unintentionally, help create the very Hindutva ideology that's now its biggest rival? Yeah, it's a complex story all about unintended consequences. So, let's break it down.
Right, and that's the big question here, isn't it? It's really a story about how tiny, short-term political moves, things that seem like a good idea at the time, can, as this analysis suggests, create these massive waves that totally change a country's political map decades down the line. Okay, so where do we even start with this? Well, according to the sources we're looking at, you've got to rewind the clock way back. We're talking about the years right after India's independence. It all begins with the very first dealings between the new Indian government and the Rashtriya Swayam Savak Sangh, or the RSS. So in 1948, right after Mahatma Gandhi's assassination, the government brings down the hammer and bans the RSS. But and this is a big but. Just 1 year later, that ban is gone. It's lifted. And what was the condition? Well, the RSS had to give a written promise, basically a constitution, saying they'd stick to being a cultural group and stay out of politics.
And this right here, our source argues, was the first and maybe the biggest miscalculation. Because by buying that cultural label, the Congress government basically gave the RSS a free pass. It gave them the breathing room to just quietly build their ideological base, all while nobody was really paying attention to their long-term game plan.
All right, let's jump forward in time. We're heading to the 1970s, and this is where things get really interesting. A huge national crisis leads to this total paradox. It's another absolute key moment in this story between Congress and the RSS. So in 1975, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declares the emergency. And with that comes this massive crackdown on all political opposition. And here's the move that had these huge, unexpected consequences. RSS members get rounded up and thrown in jail, right next to journalists, activists, and all these well-known secular political figures. And that is the central paradox. Think about it. By locking up the RSS with all these respected pro-democracy leaders, the government, the analysis says, accidentally handed them a gift. It gave them this martyr story. All of a sudden, they weren't seen as some fringe group anymore. No, now they were part of the pro-democracy struggle, and that gave them a whole new level of legitimacy they never had before. Okay, moving on to the 1980s. This decade is flagged as the next major turning point. This is when the Congress government tries to pull off this really tricky political balancing act. And according to this analysis, it didn't just fail, it backfired in a huge way. First up, you have the Shah-Bono case. So in 1985, the Supreme Court rules in favor of a Muslim woman getting alimony. But then the government steps in and passes a law that completely overturns that court decision. The goal was seen as appeasing conservative clerics. But the reported fallout was massive. It ticked off secular voters, and it poured gasoline on this growing fire of a narrative about minority appeasement. So to balance that out, what does the government do next? They make another decision that would echo for years. They order the locks of the Babri Masjid to be opened, allowing Hindu worship there. Now, the idea was probably to calm down Hindu sentiment, but the analysis here is pretty clear. This move ended up legitimizing a central demand of the Hindutva movement and just shattered Congress's image as a secular party. And the chain reaction from that failed balancing act? It was just getting started. The source material claims that these two decisions basically rolled out the red carpet for Hindutva politics, helping it walk right out from the fringes and into the mainstream spotlight.
Just look at a couple of things from that time. In 1989, Rajiv Gandhi's election campaign kicks off from Ayodhya using Rama Raja rhetoric. At the very same time, the government's own TV channel is broadcasting the Ramayan series, which became unbelievably popular. Whether it was on purpose or not, the effect was that it supercharged this feeling of Hindu revivalism across the entire country.
And you could see the effects on the ground. It was like a domino effect. The analysis points out that first, the government gave the green light to these huge religious processions organized by the VHP. Step 2, it just didn't do enough to push back against the increasingly heated language. And finally, it seems they completely misjudged how much power and momentum the movement had built up, which all culminated in the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992. So after all that, what was the end result? Where did all these events lead? Well, the analysis we're digging into argues that it didn't just change things a little bit, it created a whole new political reality in India.
And in this brand new political world, instead of fighting back on ideological grounds, Congress tried a different tactic. It adopted what many people call soft Hindutva. Using some of the same religious language, just a milder version, so they wouldn't get painted as anti-Hindu. But the source argues this was a total trap. It didn't really win anyone back, and worse, it just made the BJP's core ideas seem even more valid.
So, when you put it all together, this analysis concludes that the Hindutva movement really came out on top in 3 key ways. First, it got public legitimacy. Second, it found all these opportunities to grow and get organized, often right under Congress's nose. And maybe the most powerful thing of all, it crafted this incredible story for itself, a narrative of being victims who are now rising up to be the protectors of Hindu pride.
And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? Regardless of whether you agree with this particular take on history, it really shines a light on something bigger. Just how powerful and unpredictable the long-term effects of short-term political decisions can be. It's a fascinating look at the complicated dance between ideology, strategy, and power. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.